All right, with us today, and unfortunately couldn't be with us live, but we're doing this on Wednesday, July 2nd for play at what should be 5 o'clock Eastern Time on this July 5th. And it's the Informer. ATGpress.com is the website you might want to check out if you're at the computer, which you have to be now that I think of it, and listening to this broadcast. Iron Man, thanks a lot for coming back.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right, now there was something that's just recently happened that we've never discussed, and it's brand new. Can you break that down for exactly what's going on or what you've uncovered?
Well, what I've always said before having this proof that the government is nothing but a corporation, and a lot of the older fellas in my time back in '76 and that time was also saying the same thing, like Walt Mann, Art Morris, and it's just that we knew by what we read in history. Now, I'm not talking about the history books that are printed by the winners of the war, because whoever runs the country writes its own history, and puts a lot of lies into it, embellishes stuff, and it just it's not a true history, as if someone came down from Mars and started with a pen and recording everything, because it's slanted toward the victor side. We all know that. But recently, we've gone into Dun & Bradstreet and typed in where it says corporation name, if you want to know what a company is and all about it, and so on. And typed in the government, like I went in and I typed in IRS, Internal Revenue Service, and we know for a fact that it is a private collection agency. It's not a government agency like they list it as, the agency is a Department of Treasury, belongs to it and all this. Well, that's not so. But in just going back into regular history and going into stuff that's not reported, it sits in the library, but it's not reported, is where we found that it was created. And I also have a letter from the Secretary of Treasury to the Postmaster back in 1868, and the Postmaster was incensed that his employees had to pay an income tax, and the Internal Revenue Service did not have to pay an income tax. And why? And he wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury. There was a real treasury back then. And he wrote back, and I do have those documents that I got from Brevard University, and I had a person, because it was too far for me to travel, to get it for me, and it was the response that the Secretary of the Treasury had to the Postmaster, and in there he said that the way that the money is dispersed for him to pay his employees is through the government, okay? But, however, the Internal Revenue Service has no employees in the service of the United States, and therefore they don't pay them, and they pay the commissioner, and he pays out of his account the salaries of the employees.
So the commissioner of the IRS?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and or the Department of Treasury, the Secretary of Treasury pays the employees. So right there, and it is posted on ATG Press.
Right, now,
that whole letter is posted on ATG Press in a program that you can't change the words if you had to.
All right, now that means that IRS agents do not get paid with government checks.
No, they don't.
Now, is that the reason why they had to go to Puerto Rico to start the thing?
No, they went to Puerto Rico. They broke it up, and in 1972, and they created the BATF. The IRS took care of the ATF and everything. All right, and there was a real Department of Treasury back then, but in 1921 they abolished the Treasury, and what all those people Treasury then went, and where were they going to go? They were all fired, and they abolished it. Well, government didn't do that. What they did is they created the General Accounting Office, the GAO, and everyone in the Department of Treasury, the secretary, in the real Treasury, I'm not saying department, but in the real Treasury, went to the GAO. And that's what those people in GAO are either 1921s, they're probably all retired by now.
And a little bit beyond that, too.
Yeah. But that's what happened there. And what they did then, in 1945, because the United Nations was created and because of the way that the Federal Reserve was operating as the fiscal agent of the United States, that is why it's called a Department of Treasury, not the Treasury itself. But since 45, because of the IMF and everything, every IMF governor in this country, each country has its governor, is placed in the position of the Secretary of Treasury. There is no independent man, but they are all governors of the International Monetary Fund that have been since 1945 the Secretary of the Department of Treasury.
And how did that whole thing happen, if you could, with Puerto Rico? And that's where the IRS was great.
Yeah, I get kind of off track because it's so convoluted and so many tentacles going around that, I jump, from one to the other because in my mind, I know what I'm doing.
Right.
And I'm trying to explain to people and then they get confused. But in 1972, they changed from the IRS and broke it into two parts. And they made the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Now, they didn't have to publish that because it was an intergovernmental agency, they said. Well, it wasn't intergovernmental. It was a private corporation, the IRS, that had made a service agreement with the Department of Treasury. Okay? Because of this happening, and it's in Delegation Order number 91. And that's all placed. John Nelson was a good fellow that did that, and if I think you type John Nelson on the internet, it will come up, and it'll give you all the skinny that the people would need to know about the IMF and the governor and everything like that, because in 1995, on 4/95 and 4, I went out to Bobby Kerry case in Las Vegas, which is still ongoing, by the way. And I was an expert witness in the hearing, and this is where I and John was working practically on the same thing on parallel courses. And I let him, I says, John, there's no sense in me doing this too, and you doing it, because we're going to be duplicating our research, and I think that I can go off on somewhere else and do something and research there. And he says, well, fine, go ahead. He says, I'll just continue here. I says, but if I find anything or you find anything that we can use that we don't know, I says, how about let's, conversing. He says, okay, fine. But when they broke up the private collection agency that handled everything, and they made the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in 1972. You can find that in the Federal Register. It had to set up in Puerto Rico. And the secretary used to be a whole bunch of different names, Manuel Saldez and Xenia. I can't think of her name, but there's another one in there now. And I've had the phone company, and I called them and got all the information as to who was who. And, of course, I wrote letters to them, and I got their letters back. And, of course, they claim that they're not in there. And when I said, well, 27 CFR 250.11 actually gives the definitions of the Secretary of Treasury, and it is the Secretary of Treasury of Puerto Rico. And, of course, he debunked it at the time and says, no, it not true. Well, wait a minute. You got a CFR, which is a regulation, and it's telling you that you are the Secretary of Treasury when it mentions it in 27 CFR. And it says, it's not the Secretary at the time, I can't remember his name. It was one Janet Reno was the Attorney General. And so I've got a lot of letters that, say, no, we're not, we have nothing to do with the United States and blah, 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 blah. But when you read everything else, they sure do. Mm-hmm. And so then what is the IRS going to do now because they don't have BATF enforcement? That's where they could carry guns. That's the only time that if an agent carries a gun, it's under BATF.
Okay.
Civilly, they can't. So what do they do? And what do they collect for? Well, they collect for the Federal Reserve to collect the Federal Reserve notes that are in excess caused by this continually putting more Federal Reserve notes out to float the government.
So the IRS, when the IRS makes collections, they send it to the Fed. Is that true?
Yeah, because if you look on the back of their checks, it says deposit to the Federal Reserve Bank for credit to the United States. It's not. Yeah, anybody that gets a check back that has been canceled, that is what will be on the back of it. It's put into the account for the United States, they say. All right. Well, because the Federal Reserve is actually, by contract, a fiscal agent of the United States, it goes to the Federal Reserve to pay off the interest. That's all. It doesn't pay anything else. It doesn't pay the running the government or nothing. And in 1933, when they made a deal with the banks to get this money, that's when Roosevelt pledged all the property of all the people in the United States to the bankers to get the loan, to bail them out.
And that would be being bailed out of the Depression?
Yeah.
Which was what officially created anyway, right?
Yeah, it was the banks that created anyway because they took all the gold in the 1920s that was deposited by people because people had gold. I mean, you could use gold. Uh-huh. And that was gold and silver. And the bankers took it, and we've got this in some of the Geneva Convention books that we've had, and they took the people's gold and invested it in Europe's overseas fiascos that didn't pan out and make what they thought they was going to make. So then they had all this gold out of the United States, out of the banks, over into their deals that were going on there. And then when the people wanted their money out of the banks, and they wanted the gold, they didn't want no paper, even though the certificate said it was good for gold. That's when the banks went to Hoover, and President Hoover, and on March 3rd, they wrote into the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, the United States citizen would then be called the enemy because it could not deal in gold. That's when they confiscated all the gold. Uh-huh. And that's Section 5B. Okay? So what they did at that point is Roosevelt closed all the banks, remember?
Uh-huh.
He closed the banks so that he could issue a license to the banks to deal with the enemy, which is us, the people. Because we couldn't have gold. And they took all the gold, and that was what caused the Depression and the run on the banks and Wall Street people killing themselves and jumping out of buildings and all that stuff. The banks, they caused it and blamed the people by calling them the enemy, and that's when we went to the archives and got the Hoover Papers. And the Hoover Papers, it said, one of them I remember pretty well, and it says at 1:30 in the morning there was a bang on my door, and because all this is written down by the presidents. And he says, and there was and he named them from the Federal Reserve Bank, which was in Washington, and they had drafted up the actual change to the statute of 1917, the Trading with the Enemy Act. And he says that he refused to put his signature to that document. And then on March the 4th, Roosevelt took over. Now on March the 5th, Roosevelt wrote Executive Order 2039, which declared the national emergency, and that on March the 9th he went before Congress and said, look, I signed off on this. You got to sign off on this because I said so, because I wrote an executive order and you have to listen to it. So that's when they signed the Trading of the Enemy Act into law, which made everybody in America the enemy of the banks. We were already the enemy of the United States because that was under 12 Stat 319.
And that's war powers?
Yeah. And 12 Stat 319 still exists. When I did some research, and I asked other researchers, about 12 of them in the country that I knew was good researchers, I says, have any of you ever researched 12 Stat 319 and see if it's still viable? See if it still was a repeal? I don't know. Nobody knew. So I went and I started digging, and it took me 6 months. And I had to work backwards. I couldn't work, I couldn't work backwards. I had to go forward. I had to pull up the stat. And when I got the original statute, it unequivocally said we were the enemy. And so then I said, well, I can't find anything coming forward. There's nothing. So I went to present day, and I started looking under war powers. And I got into the war in Title 50, and I started painstakingly going section by section all the way down Title 50. And that's why it took me 6 months. I found in Title 50 sections 213, 215, 212, and I went down to the bottom to see where the source was for that particular statute. And lo and behold, 12 Stat 319, 1862. That's the source of the War Powers Act. And then I went into Title 28 because I knew that's all Admiralty. That's an Admiralty title of how the courts are to operate. But the people don't know that it's Admiralty, but it is. And in there, in Section 2461 to 2465, when I pulled them up, now that's Title 28 code, okay, but I go to the statute. Forget about the code. They lie through their teeth when they write the code. I go to the statute that the code said was in there, and lo and behold, 12 Stat 319 is the source. And 2461, it says that all actions in the courts will be as near as Admiralty as can be possible. Any guy can pull up that Title 18 and look at that section 2461 to 2465, and they will see it's right there and staring them right in the face.
All right, now, war powers have been invoked 3 times, though. Is that correct throughout the history of the country?
3 major times, yes, but we've always been under War Powers Act since 1791.
All right, and I'm referring to when Washington was the first.
Washington was the first one, Lincoln was the second one, and Roosevelt was the third one.
And the year of the third one was 1932?
Yeah, 1932. Actually, 1934. 33, 34 was the lever point in history. But did you know that Bush just issued another Emergency War Powers Act?
No.
Yep. It was on the news, and it was like one of the blurbs that you see at 12:15 noontime when nobody's home looking at it, you know. And it's, I looked at it, and then there was a little blurb on the internet. Someone probably picked up on it, and he said that he just issued a Emergency War Powers Act. Well, what does that do? That Emergency War Powers Act puts him in total control as a dictator again. Well, I mean, he's still a dictator. But now he made it official so that if he wanted to, he could cancel all elections, and he would remain in power for the rest of his life. Or until someone killed him.
All right. Well, I guess it begs the question then, are we expecting something that this would happen in preparation for it?
I was. Most people have no idea. But, yeah, I and Montgomery and Fraudbuster, we conversed quite a bit and on phone or email. And this is something that we said is more likely to happen than not. And being that he just issued that Emergency War Powers Act dicta the other day, you know, what can you say? You know, you just have to wait and see.
You know what doesn't seem to be making sense in a world where it's always the Mad Hatter's Tea Party these days. You know,
right?
If they're going to begin an intrigue into Iran. On Bush's watch, it almost seems like that would never happen in days gone by, because it just doesn't seem to be, shall we say, according to Hoyle, that you would start one in a lame duck situation.
Well, here's what it is. It wasn't over Iran. You know what this is over?
No.
He said it. North Korea.
Our buddies now?
Yeah. No, North Korea is why he instituted the Emergency War Powers Act.
Well, what I was going to, the second half of my statement or kind of question was then, since things don't make sense in this world, which makes sense that you know they don't make sense,
right?
And that would be that if he pulls something off before he leaves office, he may not be leaving office. All they would have to do then, of course, is have another attack, get all the Americans PO'd, and they can forget about gas prices and have a boogeyman to shake a stick at.
That's right.
And then he sticks around. But you know, really, through executive order,
it only applies to the government.
Yeah, but
executive order only really applies to the government, but they have allowed it because it's a corporation now. Now you got to look under corporation and conquest. If he institutes a war power, the people in this country are immediately put under conquest, even though they've been under conquest all this time. And as when you read Amjur under war and you see conquest, the United States is a belligerent government. No doubt about that at all. And you can look up the belligerent government and you'll find that even a neutral coming from another country, as long as he sets foot on this soil, he is under conquest. I mean, he could be a man from Mars that come down here and had nothing to do with the Earth. He is under conquest under Emergency War Powers Act.
Well,
and he could be retained and detained and shot and killed, and they could confiscate his spaceship, and he couldn't leave the Earth forever until the war was over.
Yeah, well, it's going to piss off all his buddies on another planet.
Yeah, that's right.
But the use of the executive order, even though it directs, you said it's only for government, but of course we are the ones who feel the trickle down from that.
Well, yeah, because the reason being is because of the new article that I just is going to be placed on July 4th on ATG Press.
Which means, folks, you can look for it right now. Okay.
Right. It's not there now, but they will hold it off until July the 4th.
Well, by the time people listen to this, it will be there.
Oh, okay.
This is July 2nd for July 5th.
Right.
But you know, the use of EO has always been the tool by which a president could become dictatorial and override basically the other two branches.
That's right.
So, I mean, it was always there. There was always a monarchical element to this whole setup, and it was left there deliberately, I would assume.
Right, it was, and that's why you see the gold fringe flag, because it's an Admiralty Maritime, but it's also the President and Commander-in-Chief's flag. And if you find that flying, that means that you're under the jurisdiction of the Commander-in-Chief, which is the President, but under war powers. That's all it means.
I got some more specific questions, but
Okay. But like when we went down to the North Carolina and did the archive search, went over to the Secretary of Treasury's office, went back to the legislative office, we noticed something. In the U.S. Congress representative's office, there was no gold fringe flag. But everywhere else we went, there was the gold fringe flag.
Indicating?
Emergency war powers and under the jurisdiction of the president, the commander-in-chief.
Well, here's what I wanted to ask you, because a lot of stuff went down in the, I guess, first third of the 20th century. And at that time, and I always feel it has something to do when the robber baron families basically became what the Rothschilds were in Europe. And that once they were able to buy influence and such, we see, obviously, the Federal Reserve being created. We see the income tax amendment. And then you start to see these other attitudes by government toward the people, and it did get to seem to be more adversarial than of advocacy.
Well, here's something, and they can read this, too, because it's in the new thing. People got to remember, the Founding Fathers, I call them the Founding Fathers. And I put that in there, but my proofreader said, no, don't put that in there. We know it's true, but the average person reading it, it's going to, so I put Founding Fathers. But anyway, you got to remember, these were wealthy men. Washington, Hamilton, Jefferson, all those were wealthy men. They owned land in here as well as in Europe. They still had their holdings in Europe. Benjamin Franklin said, I'd love to expatriate every couple of months and go back to the mother country and whatnot. And Washington, actually, in his papers, he wrote that he was not adverse to the mother country. In fact, he still felt tied to the mother country.
Yeah, because he was.
They definitely were. They had a lot of holdings, a lot of property, and everything over there. Now, look at those people. Aren't they the same as the Rockefellers, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, the Mellons, the Gates, and the Warren Buffetts of today?
Yeah.
Right. Now, how do those people, and Donald Trump and all of them, how do those people look at the average man? Dirt.
Right.
You're nothing. Well, that's exactly what the Founding Fathers thought of the common man of their day. And they were out to protect their property, not yours, not mine, no freedom, but their freedom, and screw the American common man on the street in Boston and Philadelphia. And that's why they did all of their wheelings and dealings in secret in Philadelphia. And the common man, when they came out of the building where they were holding the drafting of the Constitution, he says, the average man says, what have you wrought us? Well, wait a minute. If the average man created the Constitution that everybody so dearly loves, which is a slave instrument, like Patrick Henry said, why did they ask him that question?
Right. They didn't know.
They didn't know.
No.
In fact, when you read The Farmer, and a lot of these were books and pamphlets and periodicals written by the anti-federalists that had no say in the drafting of the Constitution, and it was only the Astors and the people that had a lot of money that was involved in drafting a contract with the Crown to appease the Crown, because when the Treaty of 1783 was signed and all the lawyers went over there, because most of these people were lawyers, remember. John Jay was a lawyer, Patrick Henry was a lawyer, but Patrick was a good lawyer. He wasn't the slobs like they are, and ripping everybody off and turning over everything to the government. Like, that's what an attorney does. He's a twister. He turns over to his boss any property that he can grab a hold of. the definition of attorney. So, people don't realize that they've been dealing with a corporation, a private corporation, all their lives, and they think that it's a government. Well, a republic, going back with the etymology of the word republic, that means corporation, plain and simple. When you come from and look at republic, and they'll say it's a commonwealth, and you go to commonwealth, look at all the definitions that makes it a commonwealth, and you'll come down to jural society. Now, what is a jural society? And you go back and follow that word back to its origin, and it says it's a corporation. Plain and simple. So everybody wants a corporation. They got it. Just like the word federal. Everybody thinks federal means a federal government. Oh, man, that's something. Well, if they would look and read what the word federal actually means, it means contract. Period. Doesn't mean a government. It means contract. Look up the word federal in 1828 dictionary and read what federal means, and it says it does not have anything to do with government. It says it's a contract or agreement. So when you say, well, what's your federal income tax? You're really saying, what's your contract income tax? You made a contract with the IRS. That's the federal. Federal means contract. Period. Doesn't mean government. A group of men sitting around, oh, we're going to protect this person, and this person, and this person, and this person. We're going to protect every people, and that's our job, is to protect them because we made a federal government. Well, you made a federal government, you made a contract government, and you contract with the government to be an associate member. And what is the definition of a person? That means that an associate member is an association. And like Spooner said, how did they make an association? Where is the documents to prove it? Well, when you go into Dun & Bradstreet or Manta and you type in the government, it'll say, I typed in the United States. Now, there's a tricky way. You can't type in United States government and expect it to be pulled up in plain sight. It's not. It has all the fractions of the United States government. And government called this, government called that. And you got to know what you're looking for. And this is where the average person doesn't, but a researcher does, because he knows certain keywords that you got to plug in. So when I did California, I went to California, and I put State of California. I just wanted to see, there was nothing there. It talked about child daycare centers and a whole bunch of other corporations, you know. But then you scroll down the corporation, and you're looking for keywords. So I found Secretary of State. I clicked on Secretary of State. It's a private corporation, and it tells you what it does. But then, as you scroll down, it says parent corporation. That's what you're looking for. And it says United States, State of California, and so on. So I clicked on the State of California. It was created in 1859, and it has an SIC code. You won't see it if you go into it unless you're a member. I became a member because I wanted to see what the SIC code and the other two locks were that's on there. And the SIC code is a standard industrial corporation. That's what it means. And every incorporation, they go to an NIAS now, and that number is going to be transposed, and the SIC number is going to be discarded because it's an industry code. Has nothing to do with government, you know?
No.
And most of the codes for the United States is around 9111, 9011. California was 93-something. And it says a private corporation called California Executive Office. And it goes all the way down, and you find out, hey, Schwarzenegger isn't listed here. It's some other dude's name. Never heard of him. He is the head of the corporation of the state of California.
Well, you had written that, and we should talk about that too, but before we do, let's just finish this line, and that is, then what you had written about this in New History of America. When you were looking through, I guess you came across something that involved, I guess, University of North Carolina or something.
Right.
Where you went into, and the sum of it is that you found that there are two governors for every state.
Yes, there is. One is His Excellency the Governor, and the other is the Governor of the state of North Carolina.
I assume the Excellency one is what? Is that the corporate?
That's the corporate and the British-controlled. Because remember, every state was a corporation. It was a plantation. And you look in conciliation on Burke's conciliation of the corporations of the colonies. Okay. From Maine to Florida, they were all called plantations. New Jersey was a plantation. North Carolina was a plantation. Has nothing to do with tilling soil. It's a social compact. So when you saw a plantation, everybody thinks, oh, plantation is a farm and a nice big old building with the pillars on it and black people toil in the soil behind mules on a plow. No, it is a corporation. It is a social corporation. Now, the king owned all of them. So they were his plantations. In 1783, he gave the people the freedom, but he kept the plantations. He kept all the soil. He kept the gold and the silver and the copper under the soil. So therefore, he kept the soil. But the people were free. They could do and go wherever they want, but he owned the land. Now, those plantations in 1783 was drafted to become states when the feigned Revolutionary War was to take place, so that when they became colonies and then states, they had to change New Jersey and a lot of them from colony to state when the United States Constitution was drafted and the United States was formed. That's when they had to go from colony to state. And when they did the state the first time, the state was in small letters. They had to capitalize the state in the second change, and that is when they incorporated.
So what we've got is the real governor, and we got the guy like we have here in Florida, Charlie Crist, who they just hang out for us, the hoi polloi to throw tomatoes at.
Yeah, because see, that's what happened in Washington in 1791 when he bought in the first bank, which was against the constitutional parameters, and he created district states laying over top of the soil. They're a fiction, laying above the land. The governor of the land and the governor of the district are two separate people. Well, he's the same person, but he operates under two
different, yeah. So you have two overlays, and you have the state, and you have above the state now districts.
Right. And people can't fathom this. How can something lay over top of a state? Well, it's a fiction. It doesn't exist. It's only in the minds of men. The state of capital, the state of North Carolina, okay, it's a fiction. It's a corporation. It only exists on paper.
With district court, federal district court, North Carolina is lumped in with whom? Do you remember?
Pardon?
Who is North Carolina lumped in with in their federal district, judicial district?
It's only they broke North Carolina into three. Yeah. Okay. It's the Eastern District, the Middle District, and the Western District.
Okay.
It's all just North Carolina. It's not like in Pennsylvania in the Third Circuit is Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware.
Yeah, because down here
Puerto Rico
is in there too.
Yeah, Puerto Rico. Yeah. The Third Circuit has control over Puerto Rico.
Well, having lived in Hudson County for some time, that makes sense now. Anyway, down here we were lumped in with Georgia, Florida, Georgia, I believe.
Oh yeah. I'm sorry.
Alabama.
I got you now. I got I got the district circuit map here. And in the district circuit, the 4th circuit is South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and West Virginia, and Delaware, and, Maryland.
Does it show you at a glance how many districts there are in the United States?
Yeah, there's 13.
What a surprise.
13 districts. The 9th district is California, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington.
I'm wondering if...
And your district is the 11th, which is Florida, Georgia, and Alabama.
Right, out of Atlanta, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if they ever went to a complete suspension of everything. If we had some kind of catastrophe, we would wind up going back to district governors. You know what I mean?
It might be because they had the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico in also with the 3rd Circuit, which was Pennsylvania and Delaware and New Jersey, and they also include the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. No, I'm sorry. Puerto Rico is in the 1st Circuit. I'm sorry. They have Puerto Rico listed in the 1st Circuit, and the 1st Circuit is Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and that's it.
Oh, that doesn't make sense. All right.
Yeah. Before, mostly the time D.C., when you look in the book, it says Puerto Rico.
Let me just get to do some business here because we haven't done it. We're talking here with the Informer. The website where you can find his information is atgpress.com. Also, the books that he has, among other works, they're available off that website. You can only buy them off that website. The 3 titles we talk mostly about the contents of are Which One Are You?, The Big Lie, and The New History of America. Now, you have Big Lie and Big Lie 3.
Right. The Big Lie was the one I wrote, and then after, when I was talking to Dave DeReamer, and we were conversing, I taped it, and it was about 47 pages. So then I decided, well, I'll make that Big Lie 3, which is an expanded version of the Big Lie.
Okay.
And it's much thicker. In fact, I'm trying to see if I have it here.
And again, folks, you can find this on atgpress.com. That stands for Against the Grain. atgpress.com.
I don't have one here.
Okay.
I sold the last copy. I got to go to the printer to have them make some more.
That's good news.
Get another order.
Ah, good. Well, I want to get back to something you just hit upon. I'm just going to mention this.
Sure.
It was interesting once when I was looking through the IRS website, and I don't know how I did this, but it was talking about a certain particular group of people. I guess it might be those who work in foreign countries.
Right.
If they have any questions with the IRS, they have to go to the Puerto Rico office.
And they also have to go, believe it or not, to the Commissioner International. In fact, that's when I was doing my work in there, and I wrote to the Commissioner International, and I asked them certain questions. And that's when the IRS was coming after me pretty hot and heavy. But what is interesting is when I got the response back, where they have the Social Security number and everything, it was -0-. There was no Social Security number tied with me at all.
Okay.
And the Commissioner International is how I went, because I told them that I wasn't a United States citizen. So immediately they gave me to the Commissioner International. And that's down in Florida, in that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes me feel better.
So, Jeffrey Dorfman was the guy that I talked to, and we conversed back and forth, and they said that they had no jurisdiction over me. Oh, good. I just paid them for what they were, and got what I needed, and then backed out.
Another thing too, when you refer to things such as codes, and
they like to use codes.
Okay.
they don't like to use statutes at large because the statute at large trumps the code. The code is only prima facie of the law. The law is the statute.
All right, where do you find the statutes?
In the statutes at large, you won't find them on the internet.
No.
You'll find them in any of the federal depositories throughout the country. Duke University, University of Law at Chapel Hill, Rutgers up in Jersey, Widener in Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania, Yale, Cornell, all, and down in your area it would be any of the major Supreme Courts of the states would have in their library. That's where I got a lot of the Supreme Court from the Supreme Court of North Carolina, when I got a lot of information that I needed. And so any of the major federal depositories would have them. You can find the federal depositories by going online, just typing federal depositories and where they're at.
Well, what can people get out of, say, the congressional record?
The congressional record is not law, but it explains what they're doing and why. It's not a document that you can use in a court of law. It's dicta, they call it. It's not evidence of the law itself, but the statute at large is the law itself. And when I was always arguing with IRS, I could tell the change in the demeanor when I started using statutes instead of their codes.
And the codes are the U.S. codes, right? And they are online, but you're saying that they're prima facie, they're not.
Right, because what they do, if you read the statute, and then you read the code that the statute is being referred to, you will find words that are in the statute that are not in the code. They take them out. It's a code. They use only from the statute what they want. If you took the 66 stat, 166, the statute of the first income tax of 1913, and you read that, the first paragraph is all that is used in the code. From 166 to page 213, all deals with corporation income tax. But you read the first paragraph and you think they're talking about you. When you read on page 213 and 214, you will see that the income tax on page 1 is premised on corporate income tax. That's how they screw the people.
Now, public laws are also in the U.S. codes, is that right?
Well, the public laws, the statutes at large and the public law are practically one and the same. Now, if you say public law 94-0156, you can go, and that's the statute. Because the public law would be the statute.
Now, that is accessible on the internet, some of it, isn't it?
Some of it, but not, again, you're dealing with an enemy, you're dealing with corruption, you're dealing with what they want, and they will not put on the internet what is damaging to them.
All right,
You have to go to the actual statute at large and pull the whole statute at large and read it, and then read what they put on the internet in the United States Code section.
This may sound crazy to you, and I don't think I'm mistaken, though.
No.
But years ago I went in, and I found in the public laws on the net that under definitions of the United States, one of them is a corporation.
Right.
Now, I went back in there, and unless I screwed up somehow, some way, a month or two ago, I could not find it there anymore.
Right. They take it out. It's 28 U.S.C. 3011, I think it is where you'll find the definition of corporation as the United States. Well, wait a minute. If that is right in the code book, and they say it's a corporation, why is Dun & Bradstreet is still listing it as a corporation, and now Dun & Bradstreet is backpedaling because of the email I got this morning, the one I emailed over to you, And you can read what the head of Dun & Bradstreet said, that, it was someone who was just hand entering data. Well, how do you hand enter it? I mean, isn't all data hand entered it? I mean, does the tooth fairy sit over there and wave her wand over it and magically appears the words corporation?
It's of divine origin, but
right.
so okay. Now what are they going to do? I mean,
it's damage. They're trying to do a damage control on it, and this one guy, like what I sent over to this person down in, I guess, Texas, wrote and gave it to an associate who works for a radio station or something like that, and he wrote the letter to Dun & Bradstreet and saying, upon review, it appears the business registration information below was hand-entered, meaning information by the Dun & Bradstreet analyst that last updated the record and not for the Texas Secretary of State. My belief is the analyst was attempting to portray the date of the inception of the organization, yada, yada, yada. And this was signed by Diane Dietrich, the National Manager of Customer Relations for Dun & Bradstreet, U.S. Customer Operations.
Dwayne Dietrich.
Dwayne Dietrich, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I got that here, okay.
So it's damage control, what he or she is saying here, because Dun & Bradstreet is accepted by all business as, putting out the right information.
All right.
Now she's saying, this was hand-entered by an analyst and trying to do this and this and this and this and this. But when you go to Dun & Bradstreet and you pull up, state of North Carolina, state of Florida, even the United States Senate is a private corporation. I was shocked when I pulled that up. It says United States Senate, and you just can't type in United States Senate; it won't come up. You got to wangle through the maze to get at it, and when it comes up, it says it's a private corporation. The United States Senate. And here's the reason why. Remember, when did the 17th Amendment take place?
You got me.
That was when the 17th Amendment, they took the senators and made the people could vote for the senators rather than the states. Because remember, the Senate was placed in business to protect the state should Congress get too antsy and want to take control of the state. They had two representatives in each state that would say, you can't do that. We are the state. You can't screw the people by taking control of the state. That's what the Senate was for. And the people never voted for the senators.
Right.
The states voted for the senators.
Well, then why give the people the vote then? Because it really doesn't matter. The same thing's going to happen.
No, way back before, the people never voted for the senators.
Right.
They voted for Congress. That's all they could vote for. All right? Now, the Congress was supposed to deal with the states and what they wanted and the government. But if they got kind of antsy, the senators are sitting back there as a buffer to prevent, they're the police of the Congress. And if they found that what Congress was trying to write into a law would affect their state to the detriment of the people, they would vote against it.
Well, my point being, though, is that you're still getting screwed. So even if you elect the people, you think you got a choice, but in the end,
you don't.
You still get, so the peasants are happier, and it's the same outcome.
That's why they did that.
All right, listen, we got to get going, but before we do, I wanted to ask you also to complete this follow the money. The IRS collects, sends it to the Fed, Fed sends it to the IMF. Where does it go from there? BIS?
Yeah, it goes to wherever they decide that they want to shovel it over to another country. But basically what they're doing is they're knocking the inflation down. I mean, you could walk around with a wheelbarrow full of money and buy one loaf of bread if they didn't do what they did. Scoffing up. And it's right in the original income tax debates that they were the Federal Reserve when they took over the bank in 1921, when they took over the real Treasury. It said they are there to sop up the excess of the Federal Reserve notes, the excess money.
Right.
Because at that time, remember, the Federal Reserve note was backed by silver. You could take a Federal Reserve note and the United States note, and they both at the bottom says pay to the bearer on demand, the number of dollars, $5, $1, $10.
All right. Once again, folks, you've been listening to The Informer. Again, 3 books which I have, and I think it goes a long way. It's hard sometimes to get your way through this, but those titles are Which One Are You?, The Big Lie 3, and The New History of America, which is my particular favorite. But at any rate, I want to thank you for coming on, and hopefully we can talk to you later in the month, early next month, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay.